But the conditioned stimulus can only produce the conditioned response after these have been through classical conditioning and the person has realized that, okay, if the bell's gonna go off, I'm gonna get food, so their mouth just naturally starts to salivate.
Huh, okay.
Without even seeing the food. They hear the bell and they start to salivate because they hear the bell, not because they see the food. And that is what a conditioned response is.
Okay. So then, so the unconditioned response is when the unconditioned stimulus works with it, right?
Right.
And then the conditioned response is when the conditioned stimulus works with it. So is there any, like, does any one of them, like, go simultaneously with the two of them? Because that's what my teacher said. He's like he said one of the stimuluses or responses go with like a neutral.
So you're gonna get the same response from both of these, but it just depends on how you present the stimulus. So, like I said right here, both of our responses are salivation, right?
Okay.
They're both salivation. And you're gonna get salivation from your unconditioned stimulus or from your conditioned stimulus. But the difference in an unconditioned response and a conditioned response is how the stimulus is presented. So if it's the food naturally produces salivation in people or dogs or whatever, and so you're naturally gonna get salivation. That's why I put naturally occurring reaction.
Okay.
But the tone of a bell, that should not make somebody salivate. But if it's been paired with this enough that the person thinks that they're going to get the food every time they hear the bell, then when they start to salivate just because they hear the bell, then that's when you get a conditioned response.
Okay. It's getting there.
So these two, you're going to get the same response,
Yeah.
right? You're going to get the same response no matter what.
Yeah, right.
But it just depends on which stimulus is coming from.
Okay. So you could you have like it vice versa? Like the stimulus is vice versa and then you could whichever one?
No.
For the response? I'm not making sense, I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So, like, you can't have an unconditioned stimulus of a bell that gives you salivation. That's just not gonna happen.
Okay.
Because the tone of the bell doesn't make anybody hungry. Just like if it was on its own, without the food.
Yeah.
The tone, like if I rung the bell right now, would you be like, I'm hungry?
No.
Right. But if I were to, like every single day, I would ring a bell and I would give you like a treat.
Okay.
And then like eventually you would start to hear the tone of the bell and you'd be like, oh, where's my treat at?
Yeah, so.
And so then that would be your conditioned response is, I need my treat.
Okay, that makes more sense. Okay.
Okay, you good there?
I think so, yeah.
Okay, so with classical conditioning, we can start to go into extinction. What's acquisition? Oh, yeah. Okay, so in order to get from a conditioned stimulus to from an unconditioned stimulus to a conditioned stimulus, you have to have this thing called acquisition.
Okay, is that like transition?
The acquisition is the process you go through of where Pavlov had the food and the bell at the same time.
Okay.
And that's acquisition, is pairing the two things together so that eventually you'll start to get your conditioned response from your conditioned stimulus.
Okay.
That's acquisition. It's just this process of getting that to that.
Okay. So it's just the unconditioned and the conditioned to the conditioned response. Great.
The unconditioned stimulus to get to the conditioned stimulus that will eventually produce the conditioned response.
Okay.
Good?
Yeah.
Okay, so now that we're good with this, we're gonna move on to this thing called extinction. And just based off of what it sounds like, what do you think extinction is? And what we've been talking about?
Isn't it, isn't it removing something from the situation?
Okay, so extinction means to remove, right?
Yeah.
So what we had right here is we had our conditioned response. We finally got to the point where our conditioned stimulus was producing our conditioned response.
Okay.
And we finally got there. And so we were ringing the bell and the dogs would start to salivate, and even though we weren't presenting them food. But what Pavlov found out is that if he rung the bell enough, and he wasn't presenting the food, eventually the dogs would be like, okay, we're not going to get food when he rings the bell now, so then they would stop salivating.
Okay.
And so extinction is what happens when your conditioned stimulus does not produce your conditioned response anymore.
Okay. Should you illustrate that?
Yeah, so I've trained my wife to that whenever I come home, that she needs to get me a glass of water.
Okay.
And how I did that is that I would walk in the door and say, I'm thirsty. And me walking in the door, that was my conditioned stimulus. And me saying I'm thirsty, that was my unconditioned stimulus. It's horrible. I'm using
that's right.
This is me. That's horrible. I'm using my wife. But, and so when I say I'm thirsty, like, this doesn't really happen. This isn't real.
Yeah.
But when I say I'm thirsty, her unconditioned response is to get me a glass of water.
Okay.
And so I've trained her enough that when I finally walk in the door, I don't have to say I'm thirsty anymore. I just walk in the door and she automatically gets me a glass of water.
Because of how many times?
Because of classical conditioning. Yeah, because I've trained her to do this.
Oh, okay.
And so eventually, like, I walk in the door and I just walk in and she gets me a glass of water. But eventually it's just going to happen to the point where she's like, he's not saying he's thirsty anymore, so maybe he doesn't want water. And so she won't be getting me water anymore. And when she doesn't give me water, that's extinction. Because she doesn't think that I'm thirsty.
Okay. So it's kind of canceling out everything.
Yes, it's when your classical conditioning is gone.
Okay.
When it's extinct.
Okay.
Good?
Yep.
Okay. What's the next part you want to go to?
Second order, let's see, second order conditioning, is that the same, kind of same thing as this?
Conditioning where the stimulus that functions as actually. Okay, so second order conditioning is basically taking, so with Pavlov, it's taking your results from an experiment of your classical conditioning. So with Pavlov, and he trained the dogs when they heard the bell that they were supposed to salivate. It's taking the bell, the conditioned where the conditioning where the stimulus not functions as the unconditioned stimulus is actually the conditioned stimulus. Okay. So I'm not going to give you an example because I don't like that one either. But basically, it's when your unconditioned stimulus. So what was our unconditioned stimulus of Pavlov?
So our it was the food, right?
Right. So the unconditioned stimulus, which was the food, when Pavlov takes that, and that was actually a conditioned stimulus in a previous experiment that he did. So it's second order, it's the second part of his experiment.
Oh, okay.
Second order conditioning. You take something from your previous experiment and you bring it into play in your experiment now.
Okay.
So he had the food as his unconditioned stimulus, right?
Right.
But in a previous experiment, his his actual conditioned stimulus was the food, and his unconditioned stimulus was something else. So he's just layering on top. So it's like a cake. So he's got his unconditioned stimulus right here from his very first experiment.
Right.
I don't know what it was. We'll say it was like, I don't know, a clap. Okay?
Okay.
And then his conditioned stimulus, which was right here, in his first experiment,
Mhm.
that was his food. Okay? Oh, not odd, food. Okay?
Okay.
And then he gets up to his next experiment. So this is experiment 1, right here. This is experiment 1. EXP1, okay? And then he gets up here to his second experiment,
Okay.
and his unconditioned stimulus is the food, right? So this is the food in the bell?
For his next one?
Yeah, so this is experiment 2.
Okay.
And so experiment 2. And so this is the food, and then his conditioned stimulus was the bell. And so his unconditioned stimulus in this experiment was actually a conditioned stimulus from his first experiment.
So, okay, so he says unconditioned stimulus for the first one is food, right?
No, so you kind of have to work backwards.
Okay.
So your unconditioned stimulus in your second experiment
Yeah.
is actually your conditioned stimulus from your first experiment.
Okay, so I'm trying to get this. I don't understand what you're saying about that.
This is just second order conditioning. It's just building off of another experiment.
Okay. I'm still really confused.
I'm trying to think of a way to explain
I wonder if you could maybe write down the words next to.
it. Okay, so this is our unconditioned stimulus, our US in our first experiment, okay?
Okay.
This is our conditioned stimulus, our CS. And then this one is our unconditioned stimulus, and then this one is our conditioned stimulus. So you take your conditioned stimulus from your first experiment,
Uh-huh.
and you actually apply that and use it as your unconditioned stimulus in your second experiment.
Oh.
It's just building on top of each other.
Okay.